It's a pleasure to introduce Mark Taylor to you. So Mark has been a consultant paediatric nephrologist in Birmingham for many years and really is one of the UK's leading experts on aHUS, both the diarrhea-associated form that Sally was talking about and also atypical aHUS. And I'm very grateful ourselves from the support that Mark's given us in our research over many years. And without him, I don't think the UK community would have been able to do what we've been able to do. So Mark's now taking a major role in setting up within the UK a means by which we can look more closely at rare diseases. So atypical aHUS, by the fact that there are so few people in the UK with this condition, is a rare disease. And how we look and manage rare diseases is of great interest to us within the renal community. So Mark's going to talk about how we are setting up a registry of rare diseases and how we hope to include atypical aHUS and possibly also other forms of aHUS within this registry. So Mark, you're very welcome. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's an enormous pleasure to be here, and I do think this is a very significant meeting. It's timely because so many things are happening at once, and there are developments, as you've heard, in research, in clinical recognition, in, as you will hear later, the availability of drugs to make a difference. I'm going to talk to you about some organizational things. But before that, I'm just going to go a little bit off-piste, really. I'm going to ask you, the families, would you say, my doctor understands aHUS? Who would put their hands up and say, my doctor understands aHUS? All right. Yes, there's one. Now I'm going to change the question a little bit, but only a little bit. Who would say, my doctor is informed about aHUS? A few hands go up. Now, it's different then, isn't it? The two questions were different because there's a difference between understanding something and being informed about something. Now, the world is awash with information, and before I tell you about this strategy, which you might think when you first look at it, oh, it's all about doctors collecting information. Well, it's not. It's about trying to understand. And I think what we've just heard from Margaret is what it really means to understand something. Now, I won't go into sort of a lot of psychology, unless you ask me, but the fact is that human brains work in extraordinary ways. And one part of our thinking, the bit that we know of as thinking, the conscious stuff that we do, is very much linked to language, and we have names for things, and that allows us to communicate because, you know, if we say this is aHUS, I can talk about it and you can talk about it. So language and that way of thinking, the bit that we do in our heads all the time, takes something and makes it an object out there to be discussed or to be worked upon or whatever. But understanding is something quite else, and different parts of the brain do that, and they do it in a different way. And understanding means that all sorts of different aspects have been brought into play. So when you hear Margaret talking about understanding something, she sees things from a completely rounded aspect. So she's got some scientific knowledge, well, she has now, but lots of other things as well, which she shared with you very bravely, I would say. Now, in what I'm going to tell you about this strategy, we are going for understanding and empowerment. That's the real message, because if you said, who needs to be the person who understands a disease? Who needs to be that person? The answer is the parents and the child and the patient. That's where the power should devolve, because as you know, with any rare disease, conventional medicine and so on is always one step behind you. So this is the regular experience of people who've got a rare disease. They go to their GP and the GP says, well, I don't know much about this. Or worse, pretends they know and they don't. That sometimes happens. We're all guilty of this. And then diagnosis is late. When you go with you know the diagnosis, but now you've got a problem, and you go back and say, look, I'm not right, this, and it's hard to get through the system because the system hasn't really understood it. So the security for all rare diseases, particularly what are called chronic diseases, diseases that go on and on through your life at various times, the greatest safety is that you know, and you can be empowered to make the changes and force the system to respond to you. Now that underlies the strategy that I'm going to explain to you. So the context to this strategy, which is a strategy by the Renal Association, and I've been associated with this, it has two things that drive it, that have come together in this present generation, you might say. One is science, and particularly this top line, molecular biology. This is the genes and the understanding of, at a minute level, how diseases work. And that's linked to what's called translational research, which is trying to put it all together. It begins, I'll show you a diagram in a sec, it begins with patients and works its way through to find out how this disease works, and it comes back to patients. I'll show you that. So there's a science side to this story, and there's a socio-political side to the story. I'll come back to the socio-political. That's going to be very relevant to this group. So here's this cycle of research. Now, modern technology means that we can very quickly go from a group of patients who have been well characterized, this is what Tim and Judith did, well characterized group of patients, and then the technology for finding out what's the abnormal gene that might lie within this family that's got this problem. This is now increasingly quick. The tools for doing it are amazing. And from that, you can quickly work out what the gene is trying to do or should be doing. And genes make proteins that regulate things in the body. So you can go quickly from here down to here. And there are great spin-offs. You can imagine why the science community is so excited about this, because you learn so much about how normal things work by seeing what happens when things don't work normally. Now comes further, very complicated work, which is to understand how that makes the disease happen. We know there's a gene involved, and we know that the genes make proteins and regulate stuff. How does that actually make you ill? And this is where you're going to hear a lot from Matthew and the science of complement and all this, which is relevant to this particular disease. But again, there's a huge spin-off to understand things that might be affecting other people with quite common diseases, for example. And having understood what makes for a disease, then at last you're in a position, logically, to think about realistic treatments. And if you look at this cycle today, you are about here. So logical thought has come out of all this work. There are some treatments which you're going to hear about today. We're very close to closing the circle and saying, aha, well, we're going to try some of these things because it's logical, and we've got some evidence for it. Now, that's so different from where medicine came from, because if you go back to where medicine started, should we say the late 18th century, people had a hunch about things and tried it out. And if it worked, it worked. If it didn't, well, it didn't, you know. And that was a very empirical way of going about it. This is a much more logical way. And you can believe it, there's a lot of international money pouring into this kind of work now. So this is another reason why your meeting today is so timely. In the States, rare diseases are big business. And a lot of research money's gone in from the NIH and so on. And here are some kidney conditions that they're working on. And in Europe, the European Commission has primed a lot of research. In these two calls for grants, they were specifically had rare disease labeled there. And this is another aHUS story, very similar, which is in that program, different one from the one that Tim is involved with. And because there is always going to be a difficulty when you come to do therapeutic trials in people with a rare disease, because there's so few of you. It's amazing to have you in an audience today. Absolutely amazing when you think that atypical aHUS is so rare that only, say, 3 or 4 children in the whole of the UK would be identified with that diagnosis in a year. That's how rare it is. 1 million children, 3 or 4 might get it. So there's this impetus to pull patients together, and one continent isn't enough, it is said. So the National Institutes of Health in the US and the European Commission have combined forces only a few weeks ago. This is the announcement in Nature. Only a few weeks ago for an international rare disease research consortium, colossal. And this is the quote: "We need to pool information from as many countries as possible." Europe and America just might about do it if they got their act together. So that's part of the content. But here's the other thing that means that you've got to have a strategy for rare diseases. One of the drivers in all this is what we've just said a bit earlier and what you heard from Margaret's witness, that patients who've got a rare disease get a rough deal in the NHS because doctors, of course, can only handle the things that they know about reliably, see day to day, common everyday things. They're good at that, by and large. But there are something upward of 800 rare diseases scattered. And can you imagine being a GP? You have to know all 800. You're going to go through a whole career and see, what, 2 or 3 of them? It's not reasonable. So there is a real inequality for patients who've got rare diseases. They don't get a fair go out of the NHS. The drug companies don't invest in their treatment in the same way as they do for common diseases because there aren't the profits in it, that kind of thing. So there's a drive, and this is the European type. You know, the Americans don't mind about inequality, but the Europeans do, and they are really anxious about this. And that's why the European money came forward when it did. We know that the outcome for patients with a chronic rare disease is better if you empower the patient. So what Margaret knew and phoned through to Switzerland, if I've got the story right, Margaret, that was a life-saving phone call by all accounts. And so empowerment of patients is crucial for yourself and for others in your family if it's a familial disorder, but that really is the way to go. Healthcare structures have got to adapt. Well, I can't talk about that. This country is tearing up all the rules about its healthcare, and we'll see what comes down. And international collaboration at a patient level is also very important. So you're meeting here in Britain, and we have a Spanish family here. Which is the Spanish family? There we are. Welcome. So all of this is very important, and there are organisations that underpin what families can experience. And here is the European organisation which backs up patient groups, Eurodis. It gets some money out of the European Commission, about a quarter of its income. The North Americans go about it differently. They have a different ethos, but it's the same thing. So major underpinning organisations to support people like us. Now, in 2009, the clinical medical officer for England wrote for the first time in a report from the CMO a chapter on rare diseases, and he called it Rare is Common, because if you put all the rare diseases together, quite a lot of people have them. And he flagged up the inequality of health, the fact that there are lots of these rare diseases, so several people get affected if you add them all together. And he was responding partly to this drive by the European Council, which has told governments within the EU, you have got to have a strategy for rare diseases. You've got to. And you've got to publish it and tell us by 2013. And the United Kingdom said, all right, we'll do that. To do that, this body called Rare Disease UK, a fantastic organisation, has spent the last year asking what does it take to put that kind of strategy together. And it produced this document in about April, and this is on the desk now of health ministers, and it is a draft strategy having taken advice from patient groups, professionals, healthcare organisers, all sorts of things to make it. And here are some of the key things. You'll like this. The strategy for the United Kingdom should combine research into all that we're doing aim to prevent and diagnose much better than we are now. It should have a strategy for treating rare diseases. There should be information for patients and the public. Why? Because that's to empower, as I've explained, and the whole of the commissioning for rare diseases has got to be jacked up. Commissioning for aHUS is something that Tim and others are working on, and there are people in this room who are going to talk to you about that later. Now, the kidney community, that's the Renal Association, took this to heart. In fact, we were a year ahead of Rare Disease UK because we had a strategy too, and it's exactly the same. And I'm going to talk about the two key planks to this, which are these two here, a rare disease working group and a registry. Now, who do you think will be best placed to work on aHUS? Well, I think it would be people like Sally and Tim and Matthew and you. It's going to be a bottom-up process. The people who are really interested to make a difference to, say, aHUS, in this case, would be those who've got a track record in seeing patients, researching into it, and the patients themselves who bring the knowledge, as we've just heard today. So this group will form, under the auspices of the Renal Association, bottom up from enthusiasm. There can only be one group for a country this size because it's such a rare problem. You can't have lots of different groups doing this. So there'll be a national group formed under the Renal Association, and it'll do all these things. It will look at best ways of caring for people. It will talk about empowering patients and carers, providing literature, listening, all that sort of stuff. It will have a major role in commissioning services so that if new advances come through for a disease, we can actually make sure you get it. It doesn't get lost in the bureaucracy of a healthcare system. We've got to know the outcomes. It's no good giving advice and so on unless you know that that advice is working through to real benefits. So auditing outcomes for people is very important, and here's the translational research that I've just described, all integrated together. Now, into that group, there has to be a sort of membership, and there has to be a way in which that group operates. And so the Renal Association published a good practice guideline for such groups, which is generic, and it could be for a different group. It could be, for cystic kidneys or all sorts of other things. A generic good practice guideline. And then if that's adopted, then you'll be able to put patient data into a database to help coordinate all of the things up here. So I'm going to show you something about the group. This diagram is taken from the one I showed you earlier about translational research. And if you look at that diagram, which starts with patients and ends with patients on a research format, the question is, who are the people engaged here? Well, they are patients and carers. They are part of the group by right. That voice has to be heard. And then, of course, they're going to be geneticists and clinicians who work out the early pathways of what the disease is like. Think about that. They're going to be laboratory scientists who are working on how the disease pathogenesis takes place and what we can learn from that. There are going to be groups of people to do with that effector arm of treatment. So there are going to be connections with the pharmaceutical industry, which we have for the condition we're discussing today. Commissioning for care, and that involves clinicians and patients as well. So in this working group, you'll see that patients have a crucial role. Without it, it would not work. And the registry itself, which is the title of the talk. Well, we felt that the most efficient thing to do would be to have a single database in which lots of different diseases could put information. And the information is, yes, it's for researchers, but it's also for patients. And we have a system for that. And what it means is that if you agree, you'd have to consent to go into this registry as a patient. If you consent to go into it, you'll be given a password. The password allows you into this system called Renal Patient View, which is an existing system for kidney patients, which allows you to see your own, hospital data. You can go home and dial yourself up with your own password, and you can see what your last level of kidney function was, what your blood pressure was in the clinic. You can also add to it yourself. You've got a section in that where you can add to your record. Blood pressure rotten, headaches recently. You can make a record of your own healthcare if you wish. That system will add up longitudinal and very high detailed data about you, which is yours, actually. It's yours. Now, in consenting to go into the registry as a patient, what you're saying is not only do you have access to what, after all, is your own, but you're saying, I will agree to be contacted by that disease-specific working group. So if there's an aHUS group, somebody in that group, the leader of that group, will be given access to your details. Only one person, it's very tightly regulated, but one person will be able to call you up and say, Margaret, there's a new study coming up, and we want to talk to you about this, this, this. So you're giving permission not to just blanket go into research, but to be spoken to about what's coming up, what the advantages might be. Do you want to go to participate in this or that or the other? So it connects patients with their own information. It connects patients with experts. That information could be a lifeline. And if you've got your password, you'll be able to go into any terminal anywhere and get it. So you may be on holiday somewhere and you're not well, and you want to explain to some local doctor that you've got this particular problem. In goes your password, and up it comes. There's your record. It's yours. So this has a number of features, this registry. It is going to provide information for research. It is going to facilitate planning. It is going to know about your outcome, what happens to you. And all of that is very good. But it is patient empowering, and it almost becomes a personal record and a safety device at the same time. Now, there will be two components to the database, just to round this off before I finish. There's the bit which is yours and you can access easily, and then the disease working group, particularly if it's involved with research, will have a back section to it where they can put preliminary things that are to do with their research work, so they can match up research results against who you are. Now, because that is work in progress and may not be clinically relevant and so on, that may not immediately transfer into the bit that you can see. I have to be quite clear about that. So let's suppose you've got a laboratory, has had some of your blood for something or other, and they've done it, they found this interesting result. Not a clue what it means. But we need to park it somewhere and match it up against all the other things we know about you. They will do that on the back end of this program. If it gets to the point where, hello, this is a really important result, we ought to feed this back to the patient and your consultant, then of course we can move it into the bit that you can see. But it's got this back end for research, so there is that ability as well. Now, I think that's really all I want to say about it, but to go back to the philosophy then, all of this data collection and strategy has got to be properly joined up, and it won't work unless clinicians and scientists and patients really get together. And that's why today is really special. Thanks very much, folks.
Thanks, Mark. That was terrific. Anybody have a question for Mark? Yes.
I'd like to make more of a comment. Thanks, Mr. Taylor, for your presentation. My name's Rob, and I'm from EuroRDs. So I especially appreciated your mention of the important EuroRDs Nord partnership. And I just wanted to kind of mention that your comment about the outcomes for patients and families being much brighter when there's a greater access to information and the opportunity to network with others who are experiencing the same thing, URDs and NORD have started an online community for aHUS, which is trying to further that exact goal, and that community is in 5 languages. So hopefully this will be the beginning of hoping to connect some more UK patients to that. Thanks.
I'm so grateful for that comment. Yes, that's really important. That these international connections are really important. Thank you.
So Mark, if there are... Yes, sorry, to go.
Margaret's going to.
Margaret's going.
Thank you. I note what you say about government and the rare diseases. And should we be lobbying our MPs and saying that we should be getting more funding for it and there should be a central pot that's made more available?
Well, I mean, as a citizen of the United Kingdom, I would say absolutely. I think that there are ways and ways of doing it. And it's much easier to lobby with friends than it is on your own. And I think one of the things that will come out from today is you're not on your own, all right? But yes, I do think lobbying, I mean, you know, politicians, well, they don't live in a vacuum. They have to hear what people are saying and wrestle with the problems, and it's hard for them. It's much harder if you don't go and talk to them. Politicians don't actually like silence. They like to be told. Because if they get it right, they get re-elected, you know? So, yes, do talk to politicians. But it's much easier to do that once there's a framework that says, come on, chaps, we want to push on this particular door we're going through, you know, that kind of thing. You can lobby on your own, of course you can, and there are brave individuals who do that. And I went to one of the Rare Disease UK discussion meetings setting up the UK strategy, that publication I showed you. And I was overawed by some of the individuals there who'd single-handedly bashed on about a particular rare disease until they got heard, you know? Absolutely stunning. But it was all of their lives, you know? It was everything they had to throw at it. And of course, there will always be people who do that. But I think what will come out of today is you're not on your own doing this. There are people with you, and I think that may be a very powerful outcome from today's meeting.
Thank you.
So, Mark, if there are individuals and families here who want to, you know, get up onto radar, what should they be doing?
Well, you've got to form your group, Tim.
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you the speed at which things are happening, shall I? There's some money from BKPA, which is the British Kidney Patients Association, and from the research fund, KRUK, Kidney Research UK, coming together to pump prime that strategy which I've just described for you. And we have a call out for groups to form right now. I think we're going to be flooded. We thought we might set up for the renal community, perhaps 4 or 5 new groups this year, and another 4 or 5 next year, another 4 or 5. I think we're going to be way ahead of that. It could well be that aHUS is up there. Now, if it is, then that group will form, the connection with families will be essential, and all of that will take place, could be this year. But the infrastructural money to get that started is there. I think you're in a very powerful position because you've also got an industry backing you. There's the whole thing about national commissioning. There are lots of things running at the moment. So there's a tide flowing in your direction, I suspect. And I wouldn't say this unless I really felt it. So I do think that, you know, this time next year when you have this meeting, I hope, you might be there as a formally organised group linked to science, making progress, talking to commissioners and all of that. That's possible. Any more questions for Mark? If not, thanks very much, Mark.
It's been a great pleasure.